You're listening to The New Paris. I'm your host, Lindsay Tremuta. In the last episode, you heard me talk to Katy Lee about the snap elections in France, why they happened, what they mean, and what party was predicted to perform well in the first round. Now here we are, a day before the second round, and not only has everything we discussed come to pass, the stakes are even higher now. When the results trickled in Sunday evening, I was at a jazz manouche festival in Fontainebleau. I tapped my feet to India Owens and the Cookout, an incredible band from Detroit, and watched as a packed, intergenerational, international crowd moved their bodies with lightness and joy. A few of us dipped our heads into our phones to check the tally, but being enveloped in a group of people united by music and in the present largely buoyed the spirits. Once at home, however, and since Monday, reality set in, and the full picture emerged of what happens now. First, let's talk about the results. The Rassemblement National, or the National Rally, or RN as I'll refer to it, combined with their newfound allies in Les Républicains, namely Eric Ciotti, brought in 33% of the votes. In a rather close second place, we've got the Nouveau Front Populaire, or the left coalition that formed in record-breaking time, which had about 28% of the votes. And 6 points behind in third comes Ensemble, the president's party. Almost immediately, our Prime Minister, Gabriel Attal, insisted that to block the far right, candidates in third place should pull out of the race. As a result, in a few days, 224 candidates in Macron's party and the left bloc have stepped down. Now, polls are imperfect, as we know, but as a result of this tactical maneuver, Paris Interactive estimates that the RN and its allies will actually end up with only 190 to 220 seats and not the 289 needed for an absolute majority. We can only hope that they're right. As for concretely what happens, in every district where a candidate did not yield a majority, voters go back to the urns on Sunday. In my district, we elected Emmanuel Grégoire in the first round with a small majority, so he's in, and we don't vote again. Anyway, back to the bigger issue. If the far right doesn't win an absolute majority, there is the issue of a relative majority, which would still make it the biggest caucus in the assembly. Here's my friend and previous guest, Reem Momtaz, a research consultant for the International Institute for Strategic Studies, telling CNN about the implications of this.
If that is the case, they would still have the opportunity to form a government, but in a parliament that is much more divided, much less stable, and where they will be very vulnerable to no confidence votes.
There are plenty of lessons to take away from these first-round results. First, the turnout rate was unusually high at 66.7%. 10.63 million people voted for the far right. This was not about abstention, and it was not a protest vote. And I think that fact is something we all need to sit with and consider, because it is real. And while it is alarming, there are reasons. The Gilets jaunes, or Yellow Vest movement pre-COVID, was a clear sign. Just like there were reasons Trump voters were able to give for supporting him despite the lies, despite hateful rhetoric, and despite attempts to dismantle the very services they need to survive. If our leaders in France refuse to understand how and why this happened here, I do fear we will continue down the very same path. Now, as for why Bardella has been so compelling, I'd say it's because he's a smooth talker. Now, only, however, if he sticks to his scripted talking points. And those talking points are what he trots out at any opportunity. Immigration is out of control and the reason people are suffering. The country needs reinforced security and purchasing power is too weak. Economically speaking, economists have said none of the far right's policies hold up, nor would they benefit the people who need them most. This is a classic scenario we've seen play out in the US and in the fallout from Brexit in the UK. Those are the basics. But on top of that, there have been highly contested ideas put forth during the last week's debate about dual nationals and Bardella's intention to prohibit them from accessing what he calls strategic positions, whether that's in ministries, working on nuclear energy, or national intelligence. Xenophobia, as we know, has always been part of the far right's ideology, and it's still there. And when you look deeply into the RN's platform, their solution to the most pressing issues of their constituents is to halt immigration. Frankly, it's a shortcut for real problems and one that doesn't treat the cause. I've spent the last week listening to interviews with everyday French people across the country, listening to people who have publicly stated their intentions to continue to vote for the far right. And what I have found interesting is that many of these individuals previously voted for the left or the far left, and others voted for Macron, but felt ignored or neglected by his arrogance and social distance. And so now he is not even an option for them either. I've also noticed that young and working class voters who historically voted left and far left also shifted to the right, and that's true across Europe. These are people, despite being raised by a generation who brought about the liberal revolutions of the 1960s and for whom overtly anti-Semitic and racist behaviors and attitudes were shameful, well, that all seems to be meaningless. The stigma associated with them, it seems, has faded. Now, to that, we could say it's because of the cost of living crisis, the extreme isolation during COVID, or the effects of TikTok and other social media platforms where far-right content runs rampant. I think ultimately it's probably a combination of all of these things. Éric Fassin, a sociologist and professor at Paris 8, told France 24 this week that support for the far right is also a question of identity.
Read their program because, in fact, they keep changing it. So what are they going to do about Europe? Who knows? What are they going to do about pension reforms? Who knows? In fact, that's why the markets are not worried. Because, in fact, it has been a rhetoric for the campaign, sort of saying we're close to the working class, and so we're going to have, basically, we're on the left. That's almost what the National Rally has been playing with Marine Le Pen for years. We're on the side of the working class, and we're going to fight financial institutions, etc. We're going to fight Europe, etc. That's what they say. In practice, everyone knows they're not going to do it, and it doesn't change the votes. That is, people know that they will not radically change economic policy. They know it. But in fact, that's not why they vote for the National Rally. Because basically, the National Rally says it's about identity. It's about being white. It's about not being Muslim. In fact, that's what they're selling. And that's what sells. So, in fact, that's why they can afford to change their positions on this and that all the time. And so the markets, well, that's not their problem, right?
Perhaps what I find most striking of all is actually that voters have bought into the RN's narrative that the party has changed. That it is somehow no longer the anti-Semitic, hateful, intolerant, fascist fringe founded by Marine Le Pen's father. It's worth remembering in these times that in 1930s Germany, Hitler didn't get elected on his most sinister ideas. He rallied support by taking credit for extending the Autobahn and job creation, which he did through shoring up the arms and defense industry. His unmasked anti-Semitism and terror trickled in over the course of several years before eventually breaking through and unleashing a storm. And if voters can't see or refuse to see the similarities between 1930s Germany and what's unfolding here and in the US, where the Supreme Court has all but guaranteed an absolute monarchy should Trump get reelected, I fear we are really in trouble. I've received a slew of messages this week from foreigners in France who asked, well, what does this really mean? What does this mean for people applying for visas or naturalization? And to that I say I think it's too soon to speculate on those particular specifics. But my gut says the far right's priority will not necessarily be to increase its power the second they get in the door, if they get an absolute majority, which, by the way, would put Bardella into the role of prime minister. I think they will start slowly and do what they can to limit all of the people and entities who can prevent them from trying. Ultimately, it's because they have their sights set on the bigger project, on 2027, the next presidential election. And the balance for their eventual power grab, the counterweight we need, is an independent judiciary and an independent press. And those things are also at risk if they get through. A press owned by industrial or financial groups poses a problem. We've seen that already with the networks owned by the right-wing media mogul Vincent Bolloré, who owns C8, CNews, Canal+, Hachette, the world's third largest publisher, and Havas, a global communication giant. And the same danger exists for regional daily newspapers, which are extremely important to maintain for the local community. The reality is the far right, wherever they are, don't care about their people or their districts. In France, they're not invested in them. Long-term, they will erode public services and privatize public broadcasting, including France Télévisions, which even pre-finances many films that are made within France and Europe. Marine Le Pen has already communicated her desire to do this. And when it comes to research and science and education, 5 French Nobel Prize winners, along with other researchers, wrote in an op-ed in Le Monde on June 25th that the RN accessing seats of power would constitute a serious and immediate threat to research and higher education in France as a result of xenophobic and nationalistic positions that would isolate France from the international scientific community. I don't know about you, but it's already giving me Ron DeSantis and Trump vibes. Let's rewrite history, let's control criticism, and let's vilify anyone who tries to stop us. Now, as for who's to blame for all of this, I admit my inclination is to blame all of it on our president, and I don't know that it really can fall all on him, but I do think a fair bit of it can. And I'd like to highlight some thoughts by my friend Lauren Collins, who profiled Emmanuel Macron for The New Yorker in 2019. And she recently looked back on that conversation for her newsletter in light of the way the last month has unfolded. She writes, "One of Macron's greatest political mistakes, in my opinion, has been his failure to uphold the pact of equilibrium that brought him to power. Instead, he has tacked further and further to the right, dragging the political center along with him and closer to the Rassemblement National, and leaving behind his many supporters who fell anywhere to the left of center-right. He would argue that the people went and he followed. Even in 2019, it was clear that Macron had not made good on the en même temps promise on which he rose. In our conversation, he acknowledged a desynchronization problem, saying that he'd front-loaded fiscal reforms. He explained that instead of practicing economic liberalism and social liberalism simultaneously, he had chosen to pursue them consecutively. But the social justice sequence that he promised never quite materialized. Personally, I wouldn't want to be in the Élysée Palace this week, and definitely not on Sunday evening, but may Macron find it in himself to finally put his hubris aside and reflect on just how much he has contributed to bringing us where we are today. And may that be something he continues to think about should he find himself in a cohabitation or governing with Jordan Bardella on July 8th. Courage à tout le monde. We need each other more than ever. I'm about to take a short break, but back to you with news from Paris and perhaps the Olympics in just a few weeks. Until then, take care of yourself, and à bientôt. If you enjoyed the show, it would mean the world if you would rate and leave a review on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, à bientôt.